Now, I met Elspeth. When I was writing this today, it was only then I realized how many years ago I met Elspeth, because Elspeth won't remember the first time she met me. I was 19, and Elspeth was a bass player in a rock band. And I was singing for another band. It was down at Anchorage, and you know, you're in your black and your leather, and you're looking tough. And Elspeth, her band had just come off the stage, and my band was about to go on, and we were standing up talking a little bit, so we just kind of did the whole nod thing at each other now, and that was the first meeting there. And then years later, I bounced up when she became a filmmaker and a multimedia artist. It was, again, a very official sort of thing, so we didn't actually get to know each other, really. And then eventually, it was in 2008 when she came to do the Cropper Writing Foundation residency for 3 weeks in Balandra. And we spent 3 very wonderful weeks together. Now I see Elspeth has become a publisher of sorts. And what has always struck me about her is her constant evolution and incarnations and ability to spearhead and embrace change. And I have to tell you that in this space here, change is something that frightens a lot of people. And change is something that normally causes a lot of people to pause and stall. I don't think Elspeth ever even quakes at the thought of change. She just goes forward. She does what she has to do. Now, I started reading excerpts from Daisy Chain last week while I was at a conference in Jamaica. So in between presenting papers or listening to papers being presented at panels, I started reading the excerpts. And I got more and more frustrated at the end of each story. And I kept saying to myself, but why Elspeth doing this to me? Now that might sound a little negative, but it isn't. Because I was becoming absorbed in the lives of these people she was writing about. And each story ended in an unfinished sort of way, right? Each page that I read ended in an unfinished way. And I said, but so when's she going to pick back up the thread of this one? And when's she going to pick back up the thread of that one? Because I want to know, and I want to know. And in reading it, I remembered, I said to myself, okay, it's stream of consciousness, and I will be the first person to admit that stream of consciousness is a literary style that isn't necessarily my favorite. Because when I read James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a young man, I got very upset until I hit chapter 3 or 4, somewhere thereabouts, when it started to become a full-fledged story. So I said, but why Elspeth doing this to me, boy? I wonder if these threads are going to be picked back up later on. And so with the excerpts that I've read, the threads weren't picked back up to tie up into this nice, neat little bow. So I went back and I reread the stories again now and started to appreciate it for what it was with the stream of conscious thread. And there are a number of things that struck me. And I wrote them down under, 4 areas. 1, experimental. The word experimental kept coming up to me. And I thought, in this day and age, when our actual communities are becoming such virtual communities, this sort of writing has an importance. And we're in an era of new media with Kindles and iPads and ebooks, and Amazon makes it very easy now for you to actually publish your writing as an electronic book, right? So I thought, okay, this is useful. And the other thing that kept striking me as I was reading the piece was the word archaeologies. Because as you read the stories, you kept engaging with these lives and getting bits and pieces of information about these lives, and these lives were overlapping each other. And if you know anything about archaeology, how it goes is, you see a space, let's say like this space that's in front here, and you map it out into a clear grid. And then you narrow the grid down into smaller boxes. And then you, bit by bit, millimeter by millimeter, you take the layers and levels of dirt off. And as you get material out of each level of dirt, you add that together to create a story. And so there were all of these layers and levels that were being created with each page of each woman's story that Elspeth was giving me. And I realized that what she was doing was not creating the story of any one particular female, but creating the story of women in general. And in rereading the story, when I saw that, I thought, but just look at how complex all of these women are, but yet at the same time, it could be the story of women. So I enjoyed that. Then the other thing was reader response, because at the end of each story or each vignette that I read, because it was never finished completely, I was now made to participate in completing the story in my own head. So now I became a writer almost in Elspeth's story, because when she ended and moved on to someone else, the person who overlapped with that life, I started to finish the story of the life of the person before me. And I liked that. I liked the use of the reader response there. And the way in piecing together the cells that I was reading about, it was kind of forcing me to use things from my life and myself to piece things together. Then the other aspect, the final aspect that I will talk about, is the communal aspect of it. You don't necessarily think of new media like the internet being communal. But because these stories have a very oral sense about them, there's a way in which it gave you the impression of oral literature, listening to the various stories. And at a point, well, I only found out this afternoon that it was one person who wrote all of the stories. I kept thinking that different people had contributed to the stories that had been written. And so I thought to myself, well, but this is great, because it's almost like an oral virtual community that Elspeth has created here. And so I thought about it, and I liked that there was this oral quality to work that is now in new media, that is virtual. So I'll wrap up. So while I understand the metaphor behind the daisy chain, the whole business of linking as the title motif, I'm not entirely certain that I think of it as the most apt title for the work, but it certainly is useful for showing the links and showing the eclectic nature of the work. I think that this work has managed to merge medias, lives, and communities as it seeks to explore and to possibly establish new ideas about publishing in a world that grows more virtual, and where the click of a mouse is oftentimes is what functions as touch. I applaud the effort for its innovativeness and its experimental use of more traditional forms of literature, such as stream of consciousness, orality, and journaling. And I think it has a lot of opportunities, not just for self-publishing, but for communities, close-knit communities of writers and readers, to get together and actually participate organically in each other's work. So I want to thank Elspeth for the exposure and the experience. And I wish her well at this launch. Thank you.